Hey, it's Tuesday, August 29th, 2017, and this is Seaside Chats with Kenneth Arthur. You'll hear me say that again in about 20 minutes as I opened up my other segment with Jake Fallon that you can hear in the second half of this show, Seaside Chats, where we're going to talk about the NFL and a little bit of the Denver Broncos, which certainly seems outside of the realm of what's relevant to the Seahawks this week or this season. But you'll see what happens there as Jake sort of watches the NFL for a different reason than I think a lot of fans do. Mostly, just you'll find out what that is. But let's just say he's watching it more like Game of Thrones than he would be watching for any specific sort of team or player. So stay tuned for that. But for now, here in the first half of the Seaside Chats podcast, the Seahawks podcast, we're going to talk about, get this, the Seahawks. And with me is fieldgoals.com writer Lars Russell, who is going to be joining me to talk about the Seahawks this week as they prepare to take on the Oakland Raiders in their preseason finale on Thursday. And in order to do that, we're going to get into a couple of the storylines with the Seahawks right now, some of the position battles and backups, and sort of what to expect as the Seahawks prepare for their season opener against the Green Bay Packers next Sunday. But for now, Lars, do you want to give, since writers so rarely take the opportunity to sort of talk about where they come from or why they write about a particular team, your brief history with the Seattle Seahawks, when it started, and how it has continued?
Oh man, well, I grew up in Seattle, so they were the team that was nearby. I mean, when I was a younger kid, I used to hate the Seahawks when they were on TV because then my dad was like screaming, and the Seahawks were, I guess, struggling, or failing to advance in the playoffs or whatever in the 80s. And so I wasn't that aware of it. I knew it was like almost like that uncomfortable feeling you get when your parents are fighting. You're a little bit embarrassed and a little bit like helpless or something. So I was like, fuck the Seahawks. But as I got older, like I moved out of Seattle and, I became that age where you start watching football. I started playing football, and then it was the kind of thing where like I was lucky to even see the Seahawks. I lived in Michigan for a while, and then as I grew older, I went to college somewhere else and lived in different cities. So to me, it was like a weird reunion with something that was from when I was a kid. I really started following the teams in the late 90s when I was in high school, and then saw the development all along. So it's been a lifelong thing for me at just different stages.
Yeah, definitely. And with the Seahawks, leading up to today, we're going into the 2017 season, obviously, and Seahawks didn't have their greatest showing last year, though they did still have a better showing than all but a few teams in the league. Right now, what sort of worries you the most because this last preseason game won't have a lot to tell us. So going into their season and their opener against the Packers, what is something that's kind of upsets you about the Seahawks right now in the roster, and you hope to see something more positive coming in the coming weeks?
Well, I think clearly the most critical position is still offensive line. It's not, we haven't seen them in regular season play against a top team. So that's going to be a question mark all year. That's got to be my biggest concern. I don't think I have the same pessimism regarding it as a lot of people paying close attention to the team, just because I think they're going to experiment and try to develop these players. And it's the sort of thing where I'm not worried about where they are right now representing where they're going to be by the end of the season. So I know it's going to be a transition, and what we've seen, last year, I think people were pretty excited about the preseason. It seemed like Britt had stabilized things and the offensive line looked okay in the first couple of games. And so it was sort of a surprise when things fell apart so much last year. I mean, part of it was that Fetty got hurt. And so we've got changing pieces already. So that's definitely the biggest concern, but I don't think I'm as upset about it as many other listeners probably.
In watching and rewatching the game against the Kansas City Chiefs, Reese Adiyambo's first start in preparation to do that, what were your thoughts on seeing that again on film?
Well, they looked a lot stronger than they did the first couple games. Clearly, I think everyone saw that. Wilson only took one sack and got the ball away quick. He had some time to run around. That's not because Adiyambo is better than Fant. It's just I think as a whole unit, they're starting to work well together. I think there was some advantage to maybe not playing the Chiefs' top unit. But Odhiambo looks solid. I think to me the biggest question is still right guard. I think Lewinsky looked a little bit better than Ibushi there. Ibushi got a few holding calls against him, and I think when Glowinski came in the second quarter, it was a little better. The whole unit played. So, I mean, I don't think we'll learn a lot Friday about playing the Oakland Raiders. Like you say, it's not going to be the top units, but the Packers will be a test. They don't have a lot of pass rush, to be honest.
Yeah, and what are you, because of preseason week 4, it's a little bit difficult. Week 1 of the preseason, it also doesn't have a lot of players that are notable playing in it for any extended period of time, but it is week 1. Week 2, you get more time for the starters. Week 3 is the closest thing to an NFL game, and week 4, it's like playing week 1 again, but nobody cares because we just want to see the actual week 1. What are you trying to get out of this final game against Oakland? What do you think the coaches are really looking for in this final game against Oakland?
Well, the coaches may be trying to make some final decisions. I don't know. I was kind of refresh my memory about last year, what happened in that game and sort of what the impressions were made and how relevant that appeared to be when final cuts came around. And the summary of the game, it was also against the Raiders down in Oakland, a couple of days away from a year ago. And the summary of the game says, Ryan Robinson returning interception, 42 yards for a touchdown to lead the Seahawks to a 23-21 victory over the Raiders. So that's a guy who doesn't make the team. I looked at who played well. I mean, Troy Wayne Pope continued to put up the best rushing stats. Ryan Robinson and Brandon Bryant were guys that made the biggest plays. And none of those guys made the initial 53-man roster for the Seahawks. So I don't know if there's really that much we'll be able to learn. Obviously, they're playing it. They're going to evaluate it however they can. But I don't know if it's going to add to the story that they've already kind of decided throughout training camp in the first 3 preseason games.
One thing that we have learned, or at least been reminded of, is how good Earl Thomas is and how important he is. The stats with and without him last year are staggering. And Bobby Wagner saying that he looks better than ever, which is scary this season, going back into his return and all that retirement talk out the window. How good has Earl Thomas looked to you so far? Does he look better than ever? And what will that mean, do you think, for the Seahawks defense as they sort of transition into this period of uncertainty again at cornerback?
Well, it's hard for me to say he's looked better than ever, because he's been so good over the course of 6 or 7 years now. But he certainly looks like himself. He doesn't seem like he's showing any slowness. He looks like a lightning bolt when he's making those strikes from deep in the third to make run stops in the second level and even at the line of scrimmage. So I'm not worried about Earl Thomas. I think the last few years we've seen players enter the season injured and have more question marks than Jimmy Graham, Thomas Ross last year. We've got some of that going on again. But, whereas Lockett and other guys are still recovering, Earl seems to be back to full fitness. And that's certainly going to put a nice seal on the defense. Everyone knows they played way better when Earl was in, and that's understandable. I think people are more concerned about, the battle of cornerback. Jeremy Lane and Peel Griffin are it looks like Lane's kind of won that from what I've heard the comments of the coaches. I think Pete Carroll mentioned today that their starters are guys that have been with the team since 2012. So that seems to include Lane. And although Lane definitely had a little bit of a struggle last year at times, some penalties, some missed coverages, but still going back to Lane's rookie year, which was 2012, the Seahawks, that if they have both Jeremy Lane and Earl Thomas in the second half of games, so that this includes the Super Bowl when Lane had broken his arm and twisted his knee, and then all the games he missed the following season, the Seahawks are still 26-5-1 in games when both Jeremy Lane and Earl Thomas played. So I think I'm not as concerned about that position. If Jeremy Lane holds off Shaquille Griffin for a little while, I'm excited to see what Griffin brings in the future. But I think he has struggled at times in the preseason, so I'm comfortable with Lane.
Yeah, is there any sort of depth at the cornerback position? Because they brought in so many new guys to compete, and sort of, do you think that what will end up happening with the Seahawks cornerbacks is that they cut a couple guys that end up being really good, or do you think they're still in a situation where they're going to keep the guys, and then some of the guys that they keep even aren't going to be that useful for this season?
I don't know. I kind of think you're just throwing hats into it when you're trying to pick the depth guys at cornerback. I mean, I have them in my notepad projection right now, as I have them keeping Thorpe and Pierre Desir, Nico Thorpe mostly for the special teams. But I think that's what you're missing. Like if you get rid of DeAndre Elliott or somebody else, it's just an interchangeable special teams player for the most part. I mean, the depth you obviously want to see them. I think I've seen a little bit more in coverage from Desir in the preseason games, but there's so many more practices, so I'm not sure who's really winning that battle. I think there's a chance that some of those guys, I mean, certainly sort of somebody who seems to be improving as his career has gone on. He's moving closer toward being like an every down, or not an every down player, but a regular season roster player for an NFL team. So I think I'd be worried about missing him more than somebody like Elliott. Who do you think is going to make it?
That's tough, but I've sort of had a soft spot for Elliott since last year because he was a guy that I picked to make the team against the odds, and then he did. But I think he's shown maybe a little bit less this year. Certainly, I think Nico Thorpe, and it's going to come down to also the addition of Tremaine Brock, and is he a solid guy that you want to count on, or is that a guy that it was just going to come and go as quickly as that? So.
Well, excuse me, I kind of, I didn't know if you were asking me, but I kind of don't think Brock has it. I mean, he's made a couple good tackles in the games I've seen, but he's playing with the third units. It doesn't seem like he's ahead of those other guys so far. Maybe it's because he's new to the team. But I wouldn't be disappointed if the Seahawks treated him like they did Antoine Winfield in 2013, just a guy who pushes the other guys, but is not necessarily going to make the roster. I think, we'll see. I guess he'll find a new number if he does.
Yeah. As far as the nice thing about right now is that Russell Wilson is healthy and he looks better than ever, completing 70% of his passes, 10.3 yards per attempt, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, and doing a lot of that work against first-team defenses, though it's not a perfect science in the preseason, that is for sure. And when you get down to Trevon Boykin and Austin Davis, both of their numbers look whatever. Trevon Boykin's thrown 2 interceptions. Austin Davis has done what he can and done pretty decently, but again, doing it in the fourth quarter of a preseason game is pretty different. And certainly Boykin had the advantage of 1 extra year in the Seahawks system, though I don't think that necessarily will matter if you just simply outplay and outpractice your competition, especially to Pete Carroll. Can you feel safe with Trevon Boykin going into this season, or do you think the Seahawks necessarily might still address that position?
Well, I think there's probably better quarterbacks out there. It seems like they feel comfortable with it. I would be very surprised if Austin Davis's, fourth quarter against the Chiefs launched him over Boykin for that job if they're not going to go outside the team. But, Boykin struggled in that game. But as far as I can tell, he's been the number 2 guy all throughout camp and in every game. And so the coaches seem comfortable with that. I don't think that, a couple quarters of football are going to dislodge him. But it is interesting. I was thinking about this because we mentioned DeAndre Elliott already. If he ends up getting cut, McAvoy's a bubble guy. Fant is hurt for this year. Tyvis Powell's already gone. Tani Tupu and Nolan Freeze are both gone. This was their entire, giant underdrafted free agent class they signed last year. They got a lot of hype, but they brought in 7 guys, made the team in the initial 53. I mean, Tani Tupu basically was there for 1 week. But if Boykin gets cut as well, then that whole building block has kind of gone, which is something I don't know if a lot of people are thinking about. So I don't expect him to be gone, and maybe one of those other guys, Elliott and McAvoy, makes a team, and certainly Fant has a place in the future. But it's interesting to think about that whole sort of like unit was wiped out that everyone was so excited about last year.
As training camp has gone on, as the preseason games have gone on, so predictably, I think with certain fans, they have turned on Thomas Rawls and Eddie Lacy. Maybe some of them never had any loyalty to Eddie Lacy. But with Eddie Lacy, not looking so fantastic in the preseason, 14 carries for 51 yards, but also just, not looking as good as Chris Carson, who everybody has immediately banded onto and said, this is going to be our guy. But, Thomas Rawls, I think a lot of people are just like, well, yeah, I'm sick of a guy getting hurt without, maybe a realization that Chris Carson, who is only weeks into, not even a day into his actual NFL career, that'll show up on any sort of Pro Football Reference page, has not even done that yet. Could get hurt. Could have an injury history ahead of him. We hope not. But so quickly, I think people have forgotten about Rawls. Not latched on to Lacy. Never really cared for Alex Collins. Like Mike Davis because of his preseason performance. Forgot about CJ Prosise. Don't think that there's anything to J.D. McKissick. Overall, what are your feelings right now about the running back unit?
Well, I still expect Rawls to be the opening day starter. I feel like the message has been passed around the last few weeks is that Rawls is okay. He just twists his ankle. It doesn't seem like there's any structural problems at all. And they're just being really cautious with him because of the histories he's had. But they've said both the past 2 games that he would be able to play if it was a regular season game. It seemed like he was winning the job before he went out. And I agree with you that Lacy hasn't been very impressive. He looked better against the Chiefs. He had some knockdown runs. Carson's been fantastic. It's wonderful. It's like some early 90s rap records where guys are just coming out with hits, first 2-3 rounds. But like you said, these aren't really hits. It doesn't matter. It's the preseason. And he's certainly not displaying anything more than Rawls did his rookie year. As far as injury wise, like how can you judge Rawls at that time? He was healthy until he didn't, until he broke his ankles that year. So we'll see what it is. I think if Rawls and Lacey are ready to go, Procise has been out too, but he's supposed to be back. I don't think that Carson's going to be starting for the Seahawks early in the season, if that's what you mean.
Another position battle on offense that people are looking at and debating about is whether or not Amara Darboh can be cut after being, months after being a third-round pick. The top four for the Seahawks is pretty well locked in with Doug Baldwin, Paul Richardson, Jermaine Kearse, and Tyler Lockett. I think Jermaine Kearse plays solidified from his experience level, his relationship with Russell Wilson, and the fact that so many of these guys are injured. And then once you get past the top four, you're looking at Casey Williams, the breakout preseason player, 7 catches for 151 yards, 1 drop on a touchdown. And then you've got Kenny Lawler, Amara Darboh, Tanner McAvoy, David Moore, Cyril Grayson. How do you see the back end of the wide receiver thing shifting out based on what you've seen in the last couple of weeks and through the preseason?
I'm leaning toward Darboh and Williams. I think Casey Williams seems to have been playing like he's earned his spot. You never can tell what's going on in practices, but I think we'd be hearing otherwise if folks weren't excited about his opportunity to make the roster, which is not something I would have projected before the preseason. And I don't know that Darboh is safe. We've seen the Seahawks get rid of guys like Chris Harper in the past during camp, but Kevin Norwood stuck around for at least a season before they traded him, for nothing. So I don't know what's gone on in practice. I don't think the decisions are only made, or they're definitely not only made on what's in the game. I think they're mostly based on what the coaches have seen in training camp and practices for weeks and weeks, rather than the few snaps that these guys are playing in the preseason. So if people are disappointed about Darboh's lack of catches and only a few snaps, I think there's a lot more information the coaches are judging on. So I still got him penciled in, but there's information I don't have either. So I like McAvoy. I was one of his proponents since preseason last year, but given the roster investment of Darboh, the way that Williams has been playing, I kind of see him outside the bubble. It depends on how many wide receivers they end up keeping. It seemed to me like McKissick was playing running back last week because they didn't see him fitting in that slot and wanted to maybe try him in another spot to see how he did. If he makes a team, it will be as a kick returner. But I think they have guys that can do that. So I don't see him in on it. So I'm giving them 6 wide receivers. Baldwin and Lockett are locks, and Richardson and Kearse I think are fine. And I think Casey Williams and Amara Darboh will be the 5th and 6th.
Is there anyone in terms of if you're looking at the guys that you think are going to have to get released just because it's a numbers game, is there any one guy that you think is going to get released that will be a regret, or, will it be a guy that can go have a pretty good career somewhere else, if not a great one, if not performing for another team this season? Because we've seen that quite a bit. The Seahawks will cut 5-6 guys who go to play for another team this year. Some of those guys, like Ron Parker, go on to have really, really good careers. And it's just a numbers game where the Seahawks can only keep so many guys. On your bubble watch of players, is there any one player that stands out among the rest as, I don't know if the Seahawks are going to keep this guy, and that could be tough?
Well, I think McAvoy is one guy I suggest just because, he has a lot of athletic talent. We saw him make a athletic catch just in this last game, even it was kind of very, very late against the scrubs of the Chiefs. But he's done that his whole career. His flash plays have been what his value is, his block punts and so on. But I kind of think that there's also a chance he fades altogether. There's one guy who I'm really excited about, and I'm afraid the Seahawks are going to cut him, but I would like to see them hold on just for his potential, is Tyrone Swoops, the old Texas quarterback who's trying out for tight end. I've suggested in the past that they could use him in almost like a Michael Robinson role as another guy who was a former college quarterback who tried to make the league at tight end, was later moved to fullback. Swoops was a real like power runner his last couple of years at Texas after they put him into like a power running back situation. So I think he can be a multi-tool weapon in the same way, but in a more smash mouth way than Tanner McAvoy. So I would hate to see him go, but I don't know if they're going to keep 4 tight ends this year with Graham coming into the season healthy. There's so much talent on the defensive line. I would hate to shed somebody like Quentin Jefferson. I think he's probably safe. I think Bass is doing really well. So, if he ends up one of the final cuts, I wouldn't like to see him go. But honestly, Tyrone Swoops is kind of my sleeper. I hope they can stick him on the practice squad if he doesn't make the team, but I think that the potential will cause another team to snap him up.
And looking again at some of these position battles, looking at the offensive line, if you've got your 5 starters, Reese Adiyambo, Luke Jokel, Justin Britt, Jermaine Afidi, and for this sake, let's say Ode Abushi, and then you've got Ethan Posick, who is guaranteed a spot on the roster, a super backup for any position. That's 6. And let's say that you keep Mark Lewinsky and Matt Tobin. Then that's going to be 7, 8. This is about where the Seahawks get to the point where they don't keep more than 8 or 9 offensive linemen, and the guys left over, Jordan Ruse, Joey Hunt, and then some guys that we haven't really talked about, like Tyrus Thompson, Will Parachak, and Daryl Brown. Between Joey Hunt and Mark Lewinsky, if you're keeping Ethan Posick, or Matt Tobin or Jordan Ruse, who do you think the order? Who do you think is the odd man left out in that situation between Tobin, Ruse, Hunt, and Glowinski?
I kind of think Hunt probably got a good chance to hit the practice squad. I think that if they would hold on to Ruse, it would be more out of concern that somebody would take him off waivers. I think Tobin's going to make the team just because they need that left tackle. I don't see Pocic playing there. He seems to be very much more comfortable on the right side or at center or a guard. So I think that's why Tobin's there. He seems like got the best chance. I think Tyrus Thompson was playing on the right side in the preseason game. So Tobin seems like, I don't know anything about him, but he seems like he's kind of fallen into a good spot. I think if they go with 9 guys, Ruse got the best chance. I wouldn't be surprised if they go 8, though. I think Posick is versatile enough. Abushi will be, a good swing guard if he doesn't start. And Glowinski's played both sides, too. So they seem to have guard set, and it's just a matter of Tobin, a tackle, and Posick going inside and outside.
And there's talk today as well about the Seahawks. Are they in the trade market? Clayton, I think, said this. Are they in the trade market for a defensive tackle, Atiba Rubin and Jaron Reed and Naz Jones? All for sure guys that we're going to see this season. And I think if you're just looking at those 3 guys, you feel okay about the defensive tackle position, especially from a run defense standpoint, the way Jones has played. But after that, you've got Rodney Coe, Tyler Harris, Garrison Smith, Jeremy Liggins, Greg Millhouse Jr., and the eventual return of Malik McDowell, though you can't really count on that, especially from where we're sitting. And maybe Quentin Jefferson is a guy who's going to be able to slide inside. Anything there in terms of those top 3? Is there any name that stands out to you that sort of that gives you at ease, or is this something that you think eventually has to be addressed through the waiver wire or trades, just like they did last year with a flurry of deals just before the season?
I think that is exactly their biggest need on that side of the ball. I mean, I was trying to make my projection, and I expect them to take 9 players. I'd kind of like them to take 10 just to add to that rotation, but 9's been their habit over the last few years. And when I chose 9, my favorite 9, I didn't really see anybody to stand in behind the top of Rubin. So, Garrison Smith could be that nose tackle. I've seen, like you said, Bass and Jefferson kick inside, but they're really much more of a rush tackle when they play tackle. And so I'd be surprised if they make a trade or just sign a guy. There's not a lot of money right now, but there's going to be a ton of players coming available since the cuts now are just one round all at once, kind of like buffet style. So there's going to be so many players available. It's almost like an extra draft pick for Seattle because there's guys they were thinking of drafting that are going to get cut. So if one of those plays a nose tackle, then I think they could probably try to find it there. If not, maybe they'll try to be more aggressive like we saw, like you mentioned last year when they got safeties and some other guys right at the bell. And that, of course, means fewer roster spots elsewhere for the Seahawks.
And another surprise, I think a little bit of a surprise would be the fact that, Marcus Smith is a guy that the Eagles drafted in the first round, and he's only been notable to me now because he's the guy who's been the least notable first-round pick of the last 5 years. I feel like I know that I watch every draft, and yet the name Marcus Smith a couple years after the 14 draft, I didn't know of it, and I don't know of him, and certainly he didn't do anything on the field to warrant consideration nationally. 4 sacks in 3 seasons after being the 26th overall pick by the Eagles. They did the similar thing with that offensive lineman that they took a year or two before that in the first round, who was Danny Watkins or whatever, and Smith going over Deion Buchanan, Kelvin Benjamin, Bradley Roby, Teddy Bridgewater, Derek Carr, Joel Bitonio, so on and so forth. But with the Seahawks in the preseason, he does seem like he's stood out. So where do you see Marcus Smith landing when final cuts come around?
Well, I've got him on the team. I mean, he seems to be playing a lot, and Will Hoyt, I guess, can play every position, but Smith, he's been hurt for the most part. I still think he has versatility, keeps him on the team. But I see Marcus Smith, he could jump on the line too. He kind of is that stand-up defensive end, sometimes rush tackle. So I think Marcus Smith, he certainly probably hasn't earned his draft position, but for just a guy that the Seahawks found, he seems like he could be a contributor for sure, which is cool. It's kind of funny. Like I was mentioning before, they're starting to run out of their much hype sort of undrafted guys. Seattle last year, I think, only had the 2 first-round picks in Earl Thomas and DeFetti, who even were on the team. And now they've kind of collected all these first-round picks. They've got Deion Jordan. They've got Marcus Smith. They've got Luke Jokel, for cheap. So it's been helpful for them.
Yeah.
If those guys don't live up to what they were, like you say, their football prospect element, if they can be contributors, the Seahawks didn't have to pay a first-round pick for them.
Yeah, definitely. And, with their draft picks this year, we've seen a giant leap up into relevancy with Chris Carson from the 7th round, and we've seen Malik McDowell fade away from the top of the 2nd round, and in the middle of very mixed results. Between Delano Hill, Tedrick Thompson, and Mike Tyson, what were your preseason takeaways in training camp and all these things that we've seen out of these guys that were drafted to help with the secondary? Because we've talked a lot in general about Shaquille Griffin with Delano Hill and Tedrick Thompson and Mike Tyson. The talk seems to be moving up and down like a heart rate monitor. So where do you stand right now with those 3?
Including Mike Tyson? I mean, I honestly, I don't think I can remember seeing Mike Tyson in the preseason.
Yeah,
I'm looking for who's in there. It's obviously they say it's a blessing as a defensive back if they don't notice you, but like I'm looking for him. I think, I'm inclined to think Tedrick Thompson still makes a team because they're looking for value. McDougald is there, but he's only on a 1-year contract. So they really drafted these guys, I think, to be the heirs to Chancellor and Earl Thomas. So I think they'll stick with him and try to develop him. It seems like Delano Hill is very secure. So I'm comfortable with that. Shaquille Griffin is certainly going to, I think, get a roster spot, and he's been fighting to be whether he's going to be the nickel corner or the right side corner. Seems like Lane has won that battle for now, but he's going to be on the team, and I'm really comfortable with his place in the development as well.
Oh, well, that's about all that we have for looking at the Seahawks right now and the state of the team. Is there any there's not really anything of happening this week other than they're going to get through the game, and we kind of have an idea of where the Seahawks roster will stand and how quality they looked against these last couple of games. It sort of gives you an idea maybe of where they stand in those the first halves of those first few games, especially looking at the fact that maybe they still would struggle against an Antonio Gates type or some of those early drives, because the Seahawks have not really been a great second quarter team and sort of come back into the second halves of games to play better. So hopefully that's something that's also we can't really get a good read on, is the fact that Pete Carroll changes so much at half, and that they seem to be such a good team at readjusting and making those adjustments. There's so many times in the last 5 years where fans have felt dejected and given up and recoiled from the Seahawks getting beat quite easily in some of these first half games, and then they come in the second half like they did against the Bucs or like they did against a number of the New England Patriots or numerous other teams to come back and win those games because of how they play in the second half, which we don't get to see if you only get to see 2 quarters of Russ Wilson, which you don't get to see if you only get to see 2 quarters of Chancellor and Thomas and Sherman. So that's something that we don't get to take into account, but we have seen them play quite well. And we've seen Russell Wilson maybe preparing for his best season. We've seen Earl Thomas looking like classic Earl Thomas. So it's a different situation than when the last time the Seahawks went to Lambeau Field. So in just talking about the Seahawks game against the Green Bay Packers in about a little less than 2 weeks, what are your feelings headed into that game? Because we know it's going to be a tough one. We know that they have been blown out there recently. It's a rare situation where the Seahawks have been blown out under Pete Carroll and Russell Wilson. So how confident are you heading into that game in Green Bay?
I wouldn't say I'm confident, but I feel good about it. I mean, I think this Seahawks team is better than the Packers. I think they were last year. They didn't have Earl Thomas. I couldn't guarantee they're going to win. They're playing on the road, But if anything, I think the blowout last year. I mean, this is corny to talk about this in such a pure narrative sense, but this team has so much pride, and they want to make up for what happened last year. This is their first time they lost by more than 10 points in almost a generation. So they want to win. They're going to want to win really badly. It's a season opener. They don't want to fall in a hole like they did the last couple of years. I think this Seahawks team is really determined to sort of make a statement early on in the year the way they did, in the Super Bowl year. And I think, obviously everyone wants to win all the games, but I wouldn't be surprised to see Seattle go beat Green Bay.
Oh yeah, I'd agree with that, and but at the same token, I maybe I'm getting too supremely confident because the Seahawks look really good, really talented, and healthy for right now. Absent George Fant and Malik McDowell, looking pretty good. So exciting to see the Seahawks come back and do another regular season under Pete Carroll with Russell Wilson, with Earl Thomas, and all of those guys getting back on the field and hopefully sorting these things out with the guys that have been out with injuries like Eddie Lacy, or not like Eddie Lacy, like Thomas Rawls, CJ Prosise, Tyler Lockett, and getting some of those guys back. And this week, because of the process of the health thing that I can't pronounce because I just can't look at it right now. Regenicus.
I don't know. I actually don't know how to pronounce it. I would say Regenicus or something.
Yeah, there it is. That's close enough. Without those guys this week as well, it's just sort of let's see what happens in week 1 in Green Bay and so on. You can follow Lars on Twitter at Beat Valley. Is there any other thing, any other place? And look, it's Beat with an A. This isn't a Dwight Schrute Beat Farm. This is BEAT Valley. Anything else that you want people to check out or follow you on?
Well, it's Beat with an _ Valley, and it's on Twitter. And you can look at my website, beatvalley.net. There's no Seahawks stuff there, but if you like good writing, there's some other stuff there. And I'm all over the internet from time to time. So, I don't know, by football stuff, you can check out the Twitter and mostly at field goals.
There it is. He's all over the internet, folks. So that's it for the Seahawks segment. Coming up next, I got Jake Fallon to talk about the Seahawks a little bit, the Broncos, and the NFL at large. We're going to go over all 32 teams and some of their narratives. So stay tuned for that right now.